At the beginning of Exodus, the second book of the Bible, Pharaoh sees that the Israelite immigrants are becoming numerous and strong. It doesn't take him long to react. He says, "There are too many of those Israelites in our country, and they're becoming more powerful than we. If we don't outsmart them, their families will keep growing larger. And if our country goes to war, they could easily fight on the side of our enemies and escape from Egypt." This is not foolish reasoning. It's smart and sensible. The original Hebrew text actually uses an extremely positive word to speak of the outsmarting. Being wise, it says in Hebrew. You should know that acquiring wisdom is one of the highest goals of biblical man. And yet, the book of Exodus assumes that everyone realizes that Pharaoh's reasoning is dangerous and immoral. Indeed, it immediately leads to the dehumanization of the Israelites in Egypt. It says, the Egyptians put slave bosses in charge of the people of Israel and tried to wear them down with hard work. Soon, this system of forced labor even degenerates into something much worse: unscrupulous murder. The midwives are ordered to immediately kill every boy born. There is apparently a direct line between being smart and sensible and crimes against humanity. The authors of Exodus knew this 2,500 years ago. Oppenheimer puts the issue back on the map today. Genius and tormented. This is how the film portrays J. Robert Oppenheimer, even in the period before the atomic bomb project. The young Oppenheimer can read physical reality like no other. That's his genius. The demons he struggles with show themselves, for instance, in the scene where, as a student, he almost kills a professor. Feeling wronged, he secretly injects an unknown substance into the teacher's apple. That it is an apple hardly seems a coincidence. In collective memory, we connect this fruit with the serpent in the Garden of Eden, where Eve and Adam eat of the forbidden fruit. Incidentally, nowhere in the Bible text does it say that this is an apple, since in Latin malum means both evil and apple. This fruit has been given the dubious honor of forever representing the temptation of evil. So too in Oppenheimer. The story about the apple and the serpent in the book of Genesis is indeed relevant to the film. After all, the central question is whether we as humans should not limit ourselves in what we want to achieve. In the film, this is about the atomic bomb and the hydrogen bomb. The mythological story of Prometheus stealing fire from the gods functions as a framework for this. In Genesis, it's about the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. In the paradise setting of Eden, man is allowed to eat of all fruits except that one. Why? Because the knowledge of good and evil was seen as a divine capacity that man cannot handle. If you give yourself that capacity, you're playing with fire is the starting point. But we all know that inside every human there is a Prometheus who wants to steal that fire. Each of us knows the serpent that encourages and challenges us to feel and behave like gods ourselves. These underlying mechanisms don't necessarily originate in bad motives. They often involve smart and sensible action. the pursuit of knowledge of physics and its practical use is a good. It's brilliant people who pursue this, and it leads to great breakthroughs. But there's also a danger there. In the film, for instance, we witness the moment that scientific insights lead to it becoming theoretically possible to make an unprecedentedly powerful bomb. Since the world is at war, you then have no choice but to produce it as quickly as possible. Voila! And the arms race is a fact. No one to blame for it. No bad guy with evil intentions. No one to stop the process. Moreover, the reasoning behind it is often sensible. What if the enemy has the bomb first? Or just because you have the bomb doesn't mean you have to use it. Or the alternative is a ground offensive in which more people will end up dying. Even the noblest targets come into the picture when Niels Bohr wants to know if the atomic bomb will be strong enough. Oppenheimer asks what he means. To end the war? Niels Bohr replies, to end all war. If you make weapons that can destroy the world, that will end the concept of war, was the idea. But there are those who don't get carried away. Izzy Rabi says he will not collaborate on the project. When Oppenheimer asks why, he says, you drop a bomb and it falls on the just and the unjust. The first atomic blast in the Los Alamos desert also raises this awareness in Oppenheimer. Seeing the devastating power of his work, he quotes one of Hindu sacred texts. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. All sensible and smart reasoning aside, that is indeed what is being created here, an instrument of mass destruction. Perhaps even an instrument of total destruction. During the development process, a theoretical possibility looms that the chain reaction will continue into the atmosphere and thus end all life on Earth. However, calculations indicate that this probability is almost zero. Almost zero. In the very last words of the film, Oppenheimer returns to this in his conversation with Albert Einstein. Albert, when I came to you with those calculations, we thought we might start a chain reaction that will destroy the entire world, he says. Einstein replies, I remember it well. What of it? Oppenheimer whispers, I believe we did. Not a physical chain reaction, but a historical one. Not immediate, but longer term, but ultimately leading to total destruction. The pessimism with which this film ends, I think, strongly marks our times. Not least because similar processes are going on today. You see a similar irreversibility in global warming and the expansion of AI, not to mention that for the first time in decades, global nuclear war is a possible scenario. Are our sensible and smart actions leading us to the abyss? Is humanity on its way to ending up like Prometheus? At the start of the film we read, Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to man. For this he was chained to a rock and tortured for eternity. Like a modern-day Prometheus, Robert Oppenheimer depicts a doomsday scenario for all mankind. Is there no hope then? I see a very small door ajar in the film. Let me take you to a conversation between Oppenheimer and Izzy Rabi. We're somewhere in the middle of the film. a discussion is going on about whether or not to develop a hydrogen bomb. Oppenheimer opposes the logic of the arms race, but meets stiff opposition from the likes of Admiral Strauss. Rabi warns Oppenheimer of the dangers of this conversation, calling his friend a prophet. When you speak, they hear a prophet. When Strauss speaks, they hear themselves. There is hope in this biblical concept of the prophet. Prophetic gifts are often confused with the ability to predict the future. Biblical propheticism is more complex. The prophet looks at reality with God's eyes and speaks to his contemporaries on behalf of God. This is often at his own expense. Niels Bohr is the first to see such a role for Oppenheimer. When the latter asks him why he has come to Los Alamos, Bohr replies, "To talk about after. The power you're about to reveal will forever outlive the Nazis, and the world is not prepared." Moments later, he adds, "Your work really begins." No longer the work of the genius physicist, but the work of the prophet is what Niels Bohr is talking about. Not that Robert Oppenheimer has achieved great successes in that field. The hydrogen bomb has materialized. The arms race has reached hallucinatory proportions. And as mentioned, the threat of nuclear war keeps many awake today. And yet, there is a hopeful door ajar, particularly if we understand our history as the first page of the book of Exodus. Pharaoh, remember? The sensible and smart actions, the forced labor, and the crimes against humanity. If we are currently in the first page of Exodus, the second and third pages are yet to follow. What should we expect then? A God who says, "I've seen how my people are suffering as slaves in Egypt, and I've heard them beg for my help because of the way they're being mistreated. I feel sorry for them, and I've come down to rescue them from the Egyptians. I will bring my people out of Egypt into a country where there is a lot of good land, rich with milk and honey." What else can you expect? A prophet who becomes the instrument of this deliverance. A prophet such as there are no two in the Old Testament. Moses is his name. In the name of God, he will fulfill the impossible, deliverance from Pharaoh, walking through the Red Sea, finding the way to the promised land. An exodus is needed, not for one specific people, but for all humanity. Will you join in?